burn, burn.
Let's go, 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 go. Yeah, 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 yeah. For the love of money, niggas come around. For the love of money, some stay around. For the love of money, what a nigga will do. For the love of the money, yeah. I gotta shake it, 12 at night to 5 in the morning. They don't give a fuck now. If it's for the money, niggas gon' ball. For that cat, I am gon' roof. And I'm barking at that cat, and I'm gon' take the roof off. When I'm riding that ride, rip, leaning to the left, but I'm steady on the right. I'm swerving with a purpose, A nigga been sipping on that purple. A nigga been cheaping on that purple. Cause I'm getting money. I'm getting money, cause I'm getting money. And I'm laughing all the way to the motherfucking bank. And I'm telling her, tell me later. And she thinking what I'm thinking, damn me getting money. I walk about the bank and I stuck up in the wheel, headed to my neck. Stick just some fucking my top feet in the fucking sand, looking like.
I was raised like most people, taught that taxation is simply the price of civilization. Roads, courts, armies, the social contract. You pay your share. That's the deal. That's always been the deal. Except it hasn't. The deeper I looked, the more that assumption, that bedrock certainty, began to dissolve. Not slowly, not gradually, but all at once, the way a reflection breaks. One sentence buried in a footnote of a 1911 congressional debate transcript afterthought. Think about that. Not a fringe pamphlet, not a conspiracy document, a congressional record, official, entered into the legislative history of the United States of America. And then, 2 years later, everything changed. The 16th Amendment was ratified in February 1913. By October of that same year, Americans filed their first federal income tax returns. Not hundreds of years of taxation, not gradual evolving policy. A single year, a single amendment, a single pivot point in history, after which the entire relationship between a citizen and their government transformed permanently. And here's the strangest part. Nobody seemed to ask why. Let me take you back. Not to 1913, further, to the world your great-great-grandparents actually inhabited. For most of recorded American history, from the founding through the early 20th century, the federal government operated primarily on tariffs, import duties, excise taxes on specific goods, alcohol, tobacco, sometimes luxury items. These were taxes on transactions, on commerce, not on the labor of individual citizens. Not on what you earned, not on the time you spent building tariff touches you when you choose to buy something from abroad. An excise tax touches you when you choose to purchase a taxed good. But an income tax touches you simply for existing as a productive person. It reaches into the transaction between you and your employer, or between you and your land, your craft, your skill, and says, before you can call this yours, we take a portion. That had never happened before. Not at the federal level, not in peacetime. There was a brief income tax during the Civil War. Brief. It was repealed in 1872. Then the Supreme Court struck down another attempt in 1895, ruling it unconstitutional in Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company. The legal reasoning was clear. A direct tax on income unapportioned among the states violated the Constitution. The official explanation of how we moved from that ruling to a ratified constitutional amendment in under 2 decades is presented to us as simple democratic evolution. The progressives wanted it, the people supported it, it passed, end of story. But the official explanation collapsing the back channel Oracle archives, the picture becomes considerably more complicated. Ask yourself a simple question. Who benefits when the government gains a permanent, elastic, expandable claim on individual income? Not the farmer in Ohio, not the craftsman in Pennsylvania, not the miner in Colorado. When you follow the institutional support for the income tax amendment through the congressional record, you find something interesting. The most vocal advocates were not the poor, for whom the tax was supposedly designed as a tool of redistribution. They were the architects of large financial institutions, men who understood, perhaps better than anyone, that a government empowered to tax income is also a government empowered to borrow against future tax revenue, to grow, to spend, to expand its financial obligations. And in that same year, 1913, something else happened. The Federal Reserve Act was signed into law in December. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. 2 transformative pieces of financial legislation. Same year, one giving the government unlimited access to citizen income, the other creating a centralized banking system capable of managing the government's debt. Not coincidence, not timing, not bureaucratic accident, a coordinated architecture. This raises a simple but critical question. What kind of federal government, what kind of system requires both simultaneously? What expansion of scope and function demands that a government simultaneously gain the ability to tax income and create a central bank to manage debt in the same calendar year? That's not fiscal policy, that's infrastructure for something new, for something larger than what existed before. Consider the speed. In 1912, there is no federal income tax enforcement apparatus, no auditors, no investigators with federal criminal authority, no agency empowered to seize your wages, your bank accounts, your property. None of it exists because none of it is needed. The infrastructure matches the law, zero tax, zero enforcement machine. By 1919, 6 years later, the Bureau of Internal Revenue employs thousands. It has regional offices in cities across the country. It has an intelligence division, a special agents unit with prosecutorial referral authority. Physical buildings, purpose-built or commandeered, operating in coordinated networks from Boston to San Francisco. Ask yourself, how does that happen in 6 years? Not decades of gradual institutional evolution, not slow bureaucratic accumulation, not the organic growth of a government agency finding its footing. 6 years, from nothing to a nationally coordinated enforcement empire with investigators or
6 years, really? That's all it took to build an empire from nothingness. The reason why it only took 6 years and not 60 is because they started printing the money themselves. The Federal Reserve was set up to print money. The Federal Reserve note is whatever they want to print from it. So you wonder why in 6 years they were able to fund all of these, you know what? This ain't even a belief game anymore. You don't understand what is going on. These people created an empire in 1913 that they did not have prior to. So before 1913, we really have to relook at history. These people created a paper money and gave it a value. Under Woodrow Wilson, also started the tax system alongside the Federal Reserve System. This is what you call a detriment to our land, allowing someone else to come here and set up a monetary system, which they only benefit from. I got more than one problem with that. And I got more than one solution for this. But let's let this guy carry on. Bang, bang.
It has an intelligence division, a special agents unit with prosecutorial referral authority, physical buildings, purpose-built or commandeered, operating in coordinated networks from Boston to San Francisco. Ask yourself, how does that happen in 6 years? Not decades of gradual institutional evolution, not slow bureaucratic accumulation, not the organic growth of a government agency finding its footing. 6 years, from nothing to a nationally coordinated enforcement empire with investigators, auditors, criminal referral authority, and the architectural footprint to house all of it simultaneously. The deeper I went into the physical record, the actual buildings, the early internal memoranda, the staffing documents now available through the National Archives, the more the timeline becomes genuinely difficult to explain. Field offices appeared in cities that had no particular tax base justifying their scale. Training manuals for special agents were printed and distributed before the ink on enabling legislation had fully dried. The apparatus preceded the need, or matched it with a precision that suggests the need was anticipated far earlier than the public record acknowledges. The official explanation is wartime expansion, progressive era institutional confidence, the natural machinery of a modernizing state. But institutional architecture doesn't materialize fully formed. It gets designed, it gets planned. Someone drew the org chart before the amendment passed. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The enforcement machine wasn't built to serve the tax. The tax was the justification for building the machine. I spent weeks in archive rooms, the smell of old paper, the fragility of documents that were never meant to survive this long, the handwritten margin notes of men who believed they were writing for themselves and not for posterity. What I found was not a single smoking gun. It never is. It's always a pattern. It's always accumulation. The congressional debates leading up to the 16th Amendment are remarkable for what they don't discuss. There is almost no extended debate about what happens after the amendment, almost no projection of where rates might go, almost no serious discussion of enforcement mechanisms, of penalties, of what willful failure to file might mean in practice. Why? Because in 1913, the top marginal rate was 7%. On incomes over $500,000. The vast majority of Americans paid nothing at all. The tax, as initially presented, was almost symbolic, a gesture, a precedent, not a permanent restructuring of the relationship between citizen and state, just a small, reasonable measure. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The same architecture appears again and again throughout history. A new power is introduced at its most modest, least threatening scale. A small tax, a temporary measure, an emergency provision, and then, gradually, then suddenly, it expands to fill whatever space is available. By 1944, the top marginal income tax rate in the United States was 94%. The evidence suggests something much larger was at work than a simple progressive tax reform. The initial rates weren't the point. The mechanism was the point, the precedent, the constitutional permission. The crime wasn't what they took in 1913. The crime was what they made possible. Here is where it gets genuinely unsettling. There is an entire world of pre-1913 American economic life that has been, if not erased exactly, then allowed to fade. Let me describe it for you.
Let me tell you something. These people have been erasing our history. One line at a time. One burning building at a time. I'm aware that the 1800s were completely faked. So they started recreating time for themselves from the 1880s on. And through these constructions, social constructs, you can see that they recreated history. They gave you a whole new history for the 1800s. They had hundreds of thousands of writers that were hired to recreate history. They had orphan trains dropping off newly found kids from fucking God knows where they came from. Nobody knows. All the records are burned. But they do know that they don't have a background. And just so happens that the colored people that are here do actually have records that go back 17, 16, 1500s. Again, that's because those colored or aboriginal or so-called black or so-called Negro or so-called African American people have been here. That's why they actually have records that can trace themselves back. I mean, this Jeffrey Epstein story is telling us that, hey, they've been rewriting history. They've been creating this Mandela effect. You know what? They created this internet, and they are allowing us to talk shit about them right now. You know why? Because these motherfuckers ain't scared of your ass. They ain't scared of me. They ain't scared of you. Have you seen these motherfuckers? They be stuttering. They look weird as hell. These motherfuckers don't have a care in the world. Yo, when you go up against people like this, you better not have a care in the world. You just better make sure that you're already pre-prepared. This is a paper war at this time. And they've taken the paper genocide to just take us out. And at this point right now, they don't even care about the color you are. If you ain't on their team, if you not part of their team, motherfucker, you can say that you separated by your color of your skin. Of course you are, especially in America. The social construct exists because you have foreigners coming into someone else's land. So you have to you have to have a social construct to make sure they stay divided. Now, again, we're trying to reconstruct the history that they've deconstructed. So we're gonna reconstruct what they've deconstructed, even though they call it reconstruction. So 1913, prior to nobody's paying tax, they are paying tariffs, but nobody's taking anything out of your check. You don't have to pay the government for going to work. Right now, you're paying the government for your energy. For going to work, you got to pay the government. Hmm.
The ever something much larger was at work than a simple progressive tax reform. The initial rates weren't the point. The mechanism was the point, the precedent, the constitutional permission. The crime wasn't what they took in 1913. The crime was what they made possible. Here is where it gets genuinely unsettling. There is an entire world of pre-1913 American economic life that has been, if not erased exactly, then allowed to fade. Let me describe it for you. Your great-grandparents, assuming they were working class or middle class Americans in the late 19th century, kept everything they earned, minus whatever they chose to spend on tariffed goods. A skilled tradesman in 1890 negotiated his wage with an employer, received that wage, and it was his. Entirely. No withholding, no filing, no April deadline. Homesteaders work land they could claim under the Homestead Act, 160 acres, essentially free in exchange for improving it. The transaction between a man and his land produced no federal liability. None. Small merchants, craftsmen, farmers, the entire economic ecosystem of pre-industrial and early industrial America operated in a fundamentally different relationship to government. Local taxes existed, property taxes, state levies, but the direct federal claim on individual productive labor, absent by design, constitutional prohibition. The deeper I went, the more I noticed the silence around this fact. It doesn't appear prominently in economics textbooks. It isn't framed as a loss in the standard history curriculum. The pre-1913 world is simply presented as primitive, underfunded, unstable, as if the income tax were medicine for a sick patient, rather than a transformation of a healthy one. Not context, not comparison, not honest acknowledgement of what was surrendered, just silence. Smooth, institutional, well-maintained silence. The silence was deafening. What it means. Before 1913, there was no such thing as failure to file. There was no federal crime called tax evasion at the personal income level because there was no personal income tax to evade. The category of criminality simply did not exist. You could not be prosecuted for something that wasn't required. After 1913, a new class of criminal was invented. Not someone who had harmed another person, not someone who had defrauded a specific victim, but someone who had simply failed to accurately report and surrender a portion of their own labor to a centralized authority. This is not a trivial observation. Criminality defines the boundaries of a society. What a civilization chooses to prosecute tells you everything about what that civilization is actually protecting. And here's the strangest part. The criminalization didn't happen all at once. It crept. The Revenue Acts of the 1910s and 1920s quietly expanded penalties. The tax code grew. Withholding, automatic deduction from wages before the worker ever touches the money, wasn't even introduced until 1943. Before that, you still paid annually. You still saw the money first. Withholding changed something psychological. It changed what felt normal. Once the money was...
So, first, after they set up this Federal Reserve, you only had to pay once a year. So they didn't even take anything out of your check. I think that happened around 1940s or something, when they actually started withholding the funds, like taking the funds out before you even get the funds. They said, oh, no, we can't even wait a whole year for y'all to give us that money. We're going to need that right now. Even though they're printing the money, not everybody knows what's going on, even though they're in government as well, too. Let me just let you know, these motherfuckers in these motherfucking business suits and these nice dresses every day, these motherfuckers are not as smart as the regular people in regular clothes doing regular jobs every day. Let me just let you know that shit. Yeah. No. So a lot of these cats that are in government, they'll take that bribe. You know what I mean? And shut the fuck up about it. No matter who dies or who stays alive or who gets, you know what? They don't give a damn. It's about self-survival when you get to that level. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's about self-survival. Look at here. Look at here. Bloodsucker. You know what I mean? A politics. A pile of ticks. Because as you can see, they only been blood sucking. And I ain't trying to make no vampire joke. No pun intended, Epstein. Figure boy. So right now, they've created a system where they print the money under this Federal Reserve system. Not only do they print the money, they're also going to start collecting money from you for them printing the money. Okay? So it's just the flow of how they actually took over. You need money to take over. Your witty smartness is not gonna allow you to take over people that are already witty and smart. So you need money to take over people that are witty and smart. Because a witty and smart person may not always think about getting the money. Maybe they just want to be smart. Now you got a hungry motherfucking intelligent ass nigga that's gonna say, okay, okay, he just like to do shit. He don't even really want to make no money. He don't want to gain power. He want to help the world. You know what? We're going to burn down this motherfucking world because y'all don't want to help nobody. That's what I feel like happened to America. You know, they felt like we didn't want to help nobody here. Look at the Chicago Fair. They felt like we didn't want to lend our goods to the entire world. So they burnt our shit down. I mean, let's be honest. This is what happened. This is how the Federal Reserve came into play. After they finished burning shit down little by little, you know what I'm saying? They were not here taking over in the 1800s. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to burn our shit down. What it was is that we were that city behind the wall that they didn't know about until they got here. And they just didn't take us over. Let's be frank. And I ain't talking about Ann, baby. We ain't in nobody's attic. Boots on ground right now.
The Revenue Acts of the 1910s and 1920s quietly expanded penalties. The tax code grew. Withholding, automatic deduction from wages before the worker ever touches the money, wasn't even introduced until 1943. Before that, you still paid annually. You still saw the money first. Withholding changed something psychological. It changed what felt normal. Once the money was removed before you received your paycheck, you stopped thinking of it as yours being taken. You started thinking of your net pay as your pay. The gross became abstract, theoretical, a number on a form rather than money in your hand, not subtraction. Redefinition. The evidence suggests this was understood because the architects of the modern withholding system, introduced notably during wartime when questioning such measures could be framed as unpatriotic, were sophisticated people, treasury economists, policy designers. They understood behavioral economics before behavioral economics had a name, as if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand, or perhaps instructions they understood perfectly. And here is where the mystery deepens in a way I find impossible to dismiss. The income tax is not an American invention. The British introduced a formal income tax in 1799, temporary for the Napoleonic Wars, then abolished it, reintroduced it in 1842, and made it permanent.
Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't believe that Britain or any place in Europe had the status to rule the world or place tax on any of their people. Let's be Anne Frank. Then. Huh. I don't think that Europe had the power like they said they had in the 18, 17, 16, 1500s. Because if we're really looking into the story and how they flipped it, pancake over, again, you have a lot of indentured servitude going on in Britain before they even get over here, even in their story. If we're going to go by their story. So when this guy is saying that Britain set up a tax first before the American actually set up the income tax, I highly doubt that because what they do is a lot is place a story on top of a story, which means that these stories may have happened, but they would have happened in America first. I mean, if we go back and look at it, the real Europe during the 1800s and not the fable story of how they reconstructed a lot of those buildings, or should I say, take out the re and just put constructed a lot of those buildings in Europe during the 18 like 90s on up to like even I would even say in the early 1900s. And even after the 1913 money started falling in, the 1913 Federal Reserve money now being collected from the so-called United States citizen is actually starting to fund the entire world. Let's not talk about you said. So again, all of this ties into what's going on now and what happened in 1913. That 1913 money that they started printing it actually began to fund the entire world. And when I say it funded the entire world, that's exactly what I mean. Not a word taken out of that statement. We in America funded the world through that Federal Reserve System that started in 1913. That goes to constructing new buildings to say that it's an old 1600 city. No, these people went out there during the 1900s, created a lot of amusement parks all over the world, and we're calling them ancient cities with our American tax dollars. After 1913, a lot of this shit started happening, and they put a lot of shit back in time that's recent, like a fucking Nigerian. That motherfucker is recently made, but they put his whole culture back in time. Yo, yo, I'm I'm throwing nothing but strikes right now, huh? You can't hit it? Batter up, bang bang.
Behavioral economics before behavioral economics had a name, as if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand, or perhaps instructions they understood perfectly. And here is where the mystery deepens in a way I find impossible to dismiss. The income tax is not an American invention. The British introduced a formal income tax in 1799, temporary for the Napoleonic Wars, then abolished it, reintroduced it in 1842, and made it permanent. Germany built its income tax infrastructure in the 1870s and 1880s. France debated and eventually implemented it in the early 20th century. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all within a roughly similar historical window. Different governments, different political systems, different languages, cultures, legal traditions, and yet the same mechanism spreading across the industrialized world within the same century. The same basic architecture. Individual income reported, calculated, surrendered, enforced criminally. This raises a simple but critical question. What explains that uniformity? You might say modernization. Industrialization created wage labor at scale, which created a taxable income stream that simply hadn't existed when most people were subsistence farmers or craftsmen. Fine, that's a reasonable explanation. But it doesn't explain the timing. It doesn't explain why the mechanisms appear in such similar forms with such similar enforcement structures in countries that were often geopolitical rivals. It doesn't explain why the criminalization follows such a consistent pattern. First the tax, then the bureaucracy, then the penalty structure, then the normalization. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision across borders that were otherwise entirely hostile to coordination. Not parallel evolution, not coincidence, not the natural drift of policy ideas. Something more deliberate, something that appears in the documentary record not to have been publicly debated as a global project, and yet somehow arrived at globally similar conclusions. I'm not telling you what that means. I'm asking you to sit with what it implies. Let me describe what I think we've forgotten. Not just the money, though the money is real and the accumulated total surrendered by ordinary families across 5 generations is staggering if you try to calculate it. But the money isn't the deepest loss. The deepest loss is a concept, the concept that what you produce belongs to you, that the labor of your hands, your mind, your time, irreplaceable, non-renewable human time, is yours by a prior claim that precedes any government's claim. That was the assumption built into the original constitutional architecture, not explicitly stated, assumed. The way you don't write down that the sky is blue because everyone can see it, that assumption is now gone, replaced. The new assumption, so thoroughly normalized that stating the old one sounds radical, is that your income belongs first to the state, which then permits you to keep a portion. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The pre-1913 world didn't have perfect freedom. It had slavery, it had robber barons, it had crushing poverty for many. I'm not romanticizing it, but it contained, embedded in its legal structure, a recognition that the individual's productive output had a protected status. That recognition is now a historical artifact. We didn't lose it in a war. We didn't.
So, I hope you guys catching up, Mustard. So this cat on this video is telling you that, shit, if you paying tax, you a motherfucking slave. So, the Slavic people are no longer the slave, which, of course, like talk about it really, but we all know that. So they've made everybody the slave now if you're paying tax. Just catch it on a relaxed type of way. Catch what he's saying. Now is tax voluntary? Why do you think these people be getting mad when they say these rich people are evading tax? You know what? Donald Trump can't evade tax if this nigga's part of the Federal Reserve System. Epstein can't evade tax if they're creating the system as it goes, the ongoing coup d'etat, so to speak. Excuse my French. Don't scope it. Don't bother me, so. Bang, bang. Wagwan. About to go back to this video. Where we going?
Lose it in a revolution. We surrendered it, though at first that no one felt it as the permanent transformation it was. I keep returning to that congressional record, that single line. The American citizen has never in the history of this republic been compelled to surrender a portion of his labor directly to the federal government. Written in 1911, 2 years before everything changed, the man who wrote it, a congressman from a Midwestern state now largely forgotten, was making a legal argument against the amendment. He lost.
Bang, bang. I hope you catch what this guy said. 1911. What sticks out in the numbers 1911? Yeah. What sticks out in the numbers 1911? 1911. I mean, what happened in 2011? Team, TEAM. Ain't no I in team. Talk to me. What happened in 1911 that also happened in 2011? It was supposed to be the year eve of the end of the world, or should we say the new beginning of the one world order world, 2012. That was the anniversary of the Federal Reserve. Talk to me. Yo. Catch up with the frequency. Electromagnetic waves right now. The radiation is crazy right now. I'm just saying, catch up to the frequency. We got to catch up to the frequency. They're using. All right, we're gonna get to it, but just know 1911 is 100 years from 2011. Talk to me. We're gonna go back to 1901. How that mimics 2001. 1911. Talk to me, which is 10 years. Well, let's say, come on, man. 2001 is 10 years from the year anniversary of 2012, which would have been 1912 Federal Reserve. Woodrow Wilson. 1913, Woodrow Wilson created more shit like tax and all this other, like 2013. There's so many similarities between these years, this 100-year gap. Again, let's talk Jekyll Island. Let's talk goddamn Bikini Bottom Island with your boy J.E., Skipper himself, in the motherfucking flesh. Him and his goddamn island out there. You got Jekyll Island creating the Federal Reserve System, where they were probably doing some crazy ass shit on that island as well too. And we'll get to the history of Jekyll Island before it was Jekyll Island. You know, it was some fucking Aboriginals on that island prior to that. Nothing to do with slavery. Stop that. These Aboriginal people were not in slavery. That is part of this reconstructed story. These Aboriginal people that you're calling black, colored, all these other colors, no, they were already here. They never came from Africa. The out of Africa theory is still a theory. Not unless you're a 23andMe type cat, which Epstein is behind that as well too. So, I mean, however you want to 6-7 it, I'm an 8-9 it.
That recognition is now a historical artifact. We didn't lose it in a war. We didn't lose it in a revolution. We surrendered it in a tax bill, incrementally, quietly, with rates so low at first that no one felt it as the permanent transformation it was. I keep returning to that congressional record, that single line. The American citizen has never in the history of this republic been compelled to surrender a portion of his labor directly to the federal government. Written in 1911. 2 years before everything changed, the man who wrote it, a congressman from a Midwestern state now largely forgotten, was making a legal argument against the amendment. He lost. His argument was entered into the record, archived, and left to yellow in a basement for a century until a digitization project pulled it back into the light. He understood what was being built. He saw the architecture for what it was. Did the people who built it understand it too? Did they know they were not merely crafting tax policy, but redesigning the foundational relationship between citizens and the institutions that govern them? Did they anticipate that within 30 years, automatic withholding would make the transaction invisible? Did they foresee the enforcement apparatus, the criminal penalties, the cultural normalization so complete that questioning the income tax would eventually sound like questioning gravity? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But here's what I do know. Your ancestors, not ancient ancestors, not medieval serfs, but your great-grandparents, people whose photographs exist, whose letters survive, whose voices were recorded on early cylinders, lived in a world where keeping what you earned was not a radical proposition. It was just Tuesday. That world ended, officially, legally, constitutionally, in 1913, in 1 year, with one amendment, and then they made it a crime to live as your ancestors had lived. Not an accident, not an oversight, not a necessary evolution, a deliberate architectural decision. The question is not whether it happened. The documents confirm that it did. The question, the one I can't stop asking, the one that keeps me returning to these archives, these transcripts, these forgotten margin notes from men who saw it coming, is simple. Who decided? And when they decided, what exactly did they believe they were building? Because whatever they were building, we are still living inside it. And most of us have never once questioned the walls.